if you really want this cake to cook and to
Yeah.
come out better, then you better study your recipe and your ingredients.
Sure.
Because that's the problem. Is a lot of people want to throw stuff in the microwave and hit start and have an outcome that looks good, or a notch in their belt, or a conviction rate. And Brian, as I sit here, I don't know what my conviction rate is. I don't care what it is.
Excellent. Yeah.
And it shouldn't matter to any.
That really shouldn't be the metric in law enforcement. And I've worried. I've got my stepmother who's been married to my dad for 30 years, was an undercover narcotics agent in I think the Cleburne Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
And worked for the DA for a little bit. I've got an older brother who's a police. I was a DPS officer in Virginia. Also happens to be a black guy. He's black. He's adopted. He's my older brother. But I look at this, especially stuff like you're talking about from the law enforcement perspective, and I worry sometimes that the incentives, like you're talking about conviction rates, things like that, the incentives are wrong. Like we're sending officers, good police officers, into wars that they cannot win, right?
Because how do you measure it?
How do you measure it? Yeah.
There's too many variables to define what's success and what's not. I'll tell you how I define success. If I go to my local HEB and I have a previous offender who I've sentenced to prison for 10 years comes up and hugs me.
Yeah.
Says, Mr. Boyd, you saved my life. I know the hardest decision you make is sending people to prison. That is the hardest decision and I've stressed this to my staff. The hardest decision you should make here is sending someone to prison.
And that should be a hard decision just based on the values of our country, right?
Absolutely.
There's a great saying. I think it was Dostoevsky who said this: you judge the condition of a society by the condition of its prisons.
Prisons. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. We send the law enforcement out into situations that are unwinnable because no matter where, I have a lot of law enforcement folks in my family too. My great grandfather was a sheriff in San Angelo. His son, my great uncle, was the chief of police of San Angelo. My dad was in law enforcement. My uncle, my brother-in-law, my father-in-law was DPS for 30 years. So I understand that. In being that I was raised around it. But you got to understand, a lot of folks in the African-American communities weren't raised with that because there wasn't many folks from those minority communities that were policing them.
The only interactions that they've seen have been negative.
Negative ones. Yeah.
There's not the positive interactions.